Welcome to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice, as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We will relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we chose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.
Well, if I could ask you about a personal revelation or realization or something like that I think I got from your book.
Please.
Maybe you can kind of confirm whether there's actually a connection or I'm just making this stuff up. But anyway, for some time I've heard that women have a deep connection to the earth, but I admit to you that I did not understand completely what that connection might be. But in your book, I think you helped me, and this is what I need your clarification with. In the introduction, you talk about the Genesis creation account as a kind of birth. That's a terrific picture. That quote, the earth's womb was without form until the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the void to create. Well, in the New King James Version, in Genesis 1, we're told that the Holy Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. And in Luke 1, same version, we're told that the angel overshadowed Mary. And that's how the conception came about of Jesus. So very similar language. Talking about creation, talking about conception. Is that a connection that you can endorse?
I would gladly endorse that. I mean, even you saying it, I'm like, yes, Paul, keep going, like keep digging, because that is a beautiful connection that you've made. And I think, again, I always am timid to say anything is truth in the sense that, but when you say it, something resonates in me that says, yes, what if, I think it is, again, the changing of words. I've watched a Bible be translated. I've watched scholars for days and hours change words, this word, this is the interpretation. And yet your interpretation is so beautiful. I think, yes, what if we dig into that? What if we dig into what it means for the angel to have overshadowed, or to the Spirit to hover over the water? Because as far as even mythology, we know that the water represents womb. And so the earth represents mother. And
right.
So yes, I endorse. And also I endorse what sparked in you to be curious about that. Like that to me feels like I can't wait to hear more of your revelations,
There may or may not be more, but anyway. Okay, so different subject, also from the book, but something that I was just super impressed with throughout. And you've talked a little bit about this, but maybe you can talk a little bit more. You say in the book, quote, God was so kind when he invited women to co-create life with him. And this in the midst of relaying some very heartbreaking stories of women going through mastectomies, your own experience, and you having to counsel many of these women through this loss. How have you been able to hold on to this sense of God's kindness in the midst of all of that trauma and abuse?
Yeah, again, it's a good question, because most of the people I work with are angry. Yeah. They're angry when their body is mutilated, or whenever their child or the life force that they're trying to create is taken from them. And, you know, there's a dream I had right after I lost my son, and I felt like I woke up in my bed, and I sat up, and my womb was ravaged open, and I looked over, and Jesus was my husband in the dream, and he had woken up, and his hands were bloody, and he couldn't stop the death that had come in my own body to my son. And I realized in that moment, I in a sense didn't trust him anymore. I didn't trust Jesus to protect me or fail me or take care of me. He had failed me. And I remember preaching a couple months later, and that dream kept coming to my mind. And I remember at one point just saying, I thought I was more special to you, Jesus. I thought that you loved me more. I thought that your protection over me made me more special to you. I thought I was your beloved. And it was really good to be honest. And I felt like God's response back to me was very clear and very, not harsh, but very clear. You are my beloved, as is every other person who has lost. Every person in Afghanistan who's been war torn, every person in Israel who is waiting, like where there has been destruction, I love them just as much as I love you. So you are my beloved, just as they are. But it was a very humbling place to be, but it didn't feel rageful or wrathful. It felt like, it just felt tender. But I think that failure of Jesus as male, as husband, to take care of me, I started to seek the female. And the mother heart is just so powerful, and it's so kind. Now, it hasn't been for all people. They have a lot of mother wounds where mothers have not been safe for them or kind. But I have a story where that is true for me. And Jesus and God then became bigger than just male. Their love, Holy Spirit, became motherly. And so I think that's where the kindness comes in, is the end of the day, a mother's touch for me is kind. And so God's touch as mother was kind. Even though it couldn't save my baby, the kindness was, I love you just as I love all of you. And I will rub your head in my lap while you weep. Even though I can't save that life necessarily, I've saved it in a bigger realm. I've saved it on an eternal basis. And that is my kindness. And so the invitation is, I mean, again, it's not a Bible study I want anyone to go through. But when I look at the Bible, every biblical character is not a story I want to go through. I do not see God's love to them in the way I think love should look. Right. And so every saint, it's all martyrdom. I don't look at these stories and think, I want that story. And yet my crucible was, I was being invited into a story of suffering, and there was a kindness. There was a kindness that I was getting to know the heart, father heart, the mother heart of God. And it was kind. I wanted a parent. I wanted God to show up. And even if it wasn't the way I wanted him or her to show up, I wanted God to show up as parent and parent me. And there is now something that when I bleed and when I birth, I know God. And when I bury, I know God in a way that I feel very alive. I feel very connected. I don't feel stagnant or apathetic or even like I'm memorizing a verse. I feel embodied by God. And that is kind on a really brutal suffering theology level. That feels kind.
And obviously that's an incredible revelation for you personally.
Yeah.
I'm interested how you communicate that revelation. Specifically, I mean, your description of losing your child is just heart-wrenching. But especially because I had a good friend who was in our church, and she lost 2 children in a row in exactly the same way, okay, with the umbilical cord wrapped around the throat and everything. But she had been told after the first one that the first one was a fluke.
Yes.
And so she's safe. Just go ahead and have kids, And then she goes through it exactly again. Same experience. And, you write about people's awkwardness in talking to you, after the loss of your child. So I'm wondering, what do you say to women who have experienced such like indelible loss?
Mm-hmm. I wish I didn't still fumble. You would think that whenever you've endured enough suffering or sadness or death, even how good I am at knowing how to bury, and I go into that, you'd think I would know. And I would still say it's always awkward. But I always push through, because the loneliness and isolation you feel when you're actually grieving, it to me is worse than my awkwardness. Like, we can be a coward or we can be a fool, and I'd rather be a fool every time. Mm-hmm. So I don't come with authority when I say this. I come with I'm risking to be foolish right now to say that there was kindness in my story, and yet I had to keep burying. And have to continue to keep burying, because death will continue. I mean, as we continue on the lifespan, it's only going to increase. So it's, how do we bury? Now, there's also just a grievance at how far behind we are in women's health. And I don't want to like go on that rabbit trail, but that she was told that, I was told the same thing. The percentage was so low that this would happen. There's no likelihood. And yet when I went into emergency C-section with my third child, she unwrapped the umbilical cord around, and she said, it was 5 weeks early. And she said, had we waited 5 weeks, you would have encountered the same thing you did with your first son. There was something about the size of my womb, the size of my babies, the length of my umbilical cords that I created, that were either genetic or there was something there, and no one told me. And so there is a fire that goes in me that says, where are we failing women in the medical research? I mean, even gender science and neuroscience is just starting to research female animals and females. Everything from our SSRIs and SNRIs have been given or prescribed to women as basically as a man smaller, a man with a menstrual cycle. That's what they say in the research. They're just and so we're not really looking at what's the best, mental health even care for women. So I could get fired up about that forever, and I won't. But what I will say is, I think the church has the same invitation. Yeah. Where have we failed stepping into the research, the biblical research, and the understanding of women and what they need to know in their own spiritual lives to be fruitful and to be cared for and to be rich in their relationship with God? And we have our desert fathers and we have our desert mothers, and I'm grateful, but we're not spending enough time really searching that and giving women a chance, and I think men a chance too, to dive deeper into those mother attributes or feminine attributes of God. And I think I think because of that, we're giving false information. We're saying it's not likely. This is such a small percentage. You're going to be fine. And I'm like, we're losing a lot of lives, spiritual or physical, due to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of on the same page as far as the church's reaction, the Western church. I grew up in the era of Joshua Harris, I Kissed Dating.
Yes, I read it. Yeah.
I read it, made notes, read it again. I mean, I'm a devoted follower.
Yeah.
I have since seen it, even within this last year or two, and kind of, I think he went on an apology tour for what he had written.
Yes.
And I see his efforts were to maybe correct the pendulum that swung in maybe the other direction, where a lot of shame was brought in, and even your own words about the wedding night, where it's kind of like, well, we're giving up something that we once held valued, and now it's going to be totally different going forward. How do you see the church how the church could properly serve those issues of sexual shame, or even discussing sexual issues, which for so long the church is just kind of relegated to, we're not going to talk about it, it's all bad. How can the church be serving people better in that way?
Right. I do think it's as simple and as complex as just bringing voice to it. If we start stepping into healing sexual shame, which a lot of people are after, and that's even, starting to be something that many ministries are going about, I think that's good. I also believe that it's such a huge undertaking that maybe if we just start talking about it, if we just start talking about sexual health through a biblical lens or through a Christian lens or a moral lens, like maybe we could also not just go after all the harm we've done. Yes, I understand the need to go after who we've harmed, and that makes sense to me. It also feels like, how are we implementing sexual health? Just the conversation about that, or the intention God had. And I think we might get sucked down in the amount of harm that's already been done. It feels like just the conversation, just what does it look like to have a sermon or two that is on the docket in our annual churches where we're talking about this, and we're bringing research in, and we're bringing understanding. So yes, go after the healing of those we've harmed. Yes, of course. And let's not miss out on the opportunity for the people who are just sitting there waiting to hear something else, something of truth. And so I would challenge each pastor, each, priest, what does it look like to bring 2 sermons into your docket that address sexuality in the church or sexuality in the Bible? I think that would be revolutionary, actually. Just that. 2 sermons. I'm really not asking for anything crazy, just 2. And if they need the verses, I'll give it to them. That, like, whatever that need is. But I do think it would just do wonders. Wonders, yeah.
What would you say to those who are reluctant to the idea of counseling or therapy, but they want this, more personal experience, the spiritual growth in their lives? How can they pursue this change or healing?
Sure. That's even why I put the questions at the end of each chapter in the book. There's something really kind that I've stayed in a theology-based world, even being a counselor, because there is resistance still, and that's okay. That's not, but don't let it hinder your own healing. And so I think there is ways to do that by yourself, but I would say the actual place, I would say, is do it in community. So even if we just take, for example, my book, like, what would it be to sit with a group of people and answer those questions together? There's a group of 3 churches in North Carolina that I've been working with the women who are all on staff, and they've been going through the book together, and they meet once a week, and they tell their stories. They tell their stories of menstruation, of birth. And literally the woman texted me and said, I've been in ministry relationships with these women for 7 years. And she said, in the last 3 weeks, I have come to know them in a way I've never known almost anybody in my own life, any woman in my own life. And so then my other push is, okay, then share that with your husband too. Like, bring that back to keep intimacy is what heals us. Safe, healthy intimacy is what heals us. And so I would say, I don't think it has to be counseling. I think it has to be community. And that is what the church, I think, tries to offer, and then doesn't know what to do because we have the masses, or because we don't know what to do with the awkward things. And so can we find bridges that bring us into intimacy and community? And I think that will heal the multitudes. Because the Spirit shows up in those places. Yeah.
Do you find more of an openness these days among especially men thinking in terms of the feminine nature of God? Are you seeing any of that?
I want to say yes with all my heart. And I, not on the whole, but my husband has a little joke. I get my alumni letter from my seminary, from RTS, every month or whatever, and he'll write underneath, their logo, serving women's voice since whatever the year that the seminary starts. And it's like our little joke.
Yeah.
And bless them for what they did teach me. And I don't feel freed up. I don't feel, again, I'm not asking to overrule anyone, but I don't feel invited to the table.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like for women in the church, if there is a seat at the table for a woman, it's one seat. And then it makes all the women fight over it or be jealous of the other. And so there's not a collective. There's not this, I don't even know if I want to use the word equality, but there's definitely, if there is a seat, there's one. And there's so much pressure to be the one voice, the one female voice at the table. There's so many dynamics going on, underlying dynamics. And that, it's just that limits us. Yeah. That limits us all. So I think we're coming against a really slow moving ship. And I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't. I know what schools that I can ask to teach at, and I know what schools invite me, and I know what schools don't. Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that I adjunct at 4 of the universities in Seattle, and yet has my own alumni schools invited me to speak. No. Now, do I take that personally? No. But does it also speak to, we know where we're invited and we know where we're not, male or female. We know with our belief systems, when we speak out loud and we say what we believe, we either get invited to the table for more or we're not. And so it shows itself.
I don't know if you're familiar with the name Nell Noddings.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So Ethic of Care and all of that.
Yes.
And when she came out with her first book in the 80s, which I'm just going to say was The Feminine Nature of Caring, I think that's true. She took a lot of heat because she took heat from the women because she didn't say feminist. She said feminine. And she took heat from the men because she was clearly targeting some of the psychologists and philosophers who have, as you mentioned earlier, focused so much on the men and on males and all of these psychological studies that were done only with men. And then we're going to make these huge theories out of these things, and the women just simply aren't at the table, you know. And she's been fighting that battle for decades.
Yes.
Anyway, recently I wrote an introduction to a book that is about ethic of care, but it's about Christian ethic of care. And she is, you know, again, she gets kind of a bad rap sometimes, but she has some amazing things to say. And one of the things she says in there is, in almost all cultures, women seem to develop the capacity to care more often and more deeply than men. I was just reminded of that because of you talking about the scriptures where God is essentially referring to himself as a female being, you know. So let's see, a bear robbed of her cubs, a mother comforting her child, a woman nursing her baby, and of course Jesus referring to himself as the hen and the chicks, you know, and everything else like that. And it just is all so tied up in the nature of God. And so if we're going to talk about a Christian ethic of care, seems like pretty much we got to deal with this at some point, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't even know if that's a question, but it's just something that is emerging, I guess, in my field, which is education. And just respecting and expecting, I guess, that we've just got to get out of these roles, you know, that we've had people in that we just want to shoehorn everybody into. You know, she talks about the universal breadwinner model versus the universal caregiver model. And that, you know, typically it's the breadwinner is the man, the caregiver is the woman. And why, you know, why is that? And
Yeah.
Not even so much that women can earn the money, but also men can take care of the babies.
Yeah.
Like we all have things to learn about these, issues. Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm not even sure there's a question in there, but I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. And I think what is so kind in what you're saying is your eyes are seeing. And whether we look at research, even Jackson Katz's research, where he says like a man saying something about the woman is going to go so much further than the woman saying it about a woman. And so as much as I am so grateful that I birthed this book, and I will get a lot of flack and I will get praise for it, both, there's still something of, I'm realizing the blessing when a man says, this is important. This is good. And that's just how it is. And I'm actually okay with that. And I'm actually grateful for the fathering, for the strength of the man that comes in that place. And what I would say is what's really been kind in my own story is my husband works 3 days a week and I work 2 days a week, and we switch off with the household care. And it is not perfect. I would still say I think I do a lot more of the invisible work than he does. And yet I feel so known and so seen by the way he wrestles too, the futility of the work in the home, and the responsibility. And so there's a grace that we've been given that I don't think the masses have encountered. I think, like you said, it's like the feminist, whereas I align with more of a womanist view, but like the feminist would say, I need all the same rights. And I just want to be known. End of the day, I want to be welcomed and I want to be seen as just as an equal human, whether that's invited to the table in the church setting or whether that's even known in my own home in how we raise our family. But I have just the kindness of men who are seeing with those eyes. I just feel my gratitude. I feel my gratitude. So for your spiel and no noddings, I feel my gratitude. We do have to womaneer our way through this. And that's part of the process, but thank God for the men who are seeing that and recognizing that and helping us womaneer.
I can speak for all the men everywhere and say that we have a lot of gratitude for you.
I loved your story about being in Kenya and watching sort of the tribal celebrations. I got to spend a fair amount of time in Kenya myself, and we got to go to a Maasai birth celebration.
Okay, same.
Very similar, and all the men, it was so funny. We who were on the mission team from the West got to go in and see the child, but as soon as we went in, all the girls that were on our trip got to go and hang out with the women, and all the fellas went over, and we just stood with these mute men who were just looking off into the distance, and it was so fun. It was amazing. But to your point, we worked with a guy that was just phenomenal because, of course, the patriarchal nature of Kenyan tribes, as they are, even in the church, sort of suppress the role of women in the church. But the crazy thing is, culturally, there are far more women in the church, and they're the ones that do all the work. And so the last time we went back to visit, this was in 2015, we were asking about how the churches were going that he was over, a dear friend of ours that's a Kenyan fellow, and he was saying that he realized that even though denominationally he was not allowed to give leadership positions to women, he realized they were the ones that were contributing the most to the church. So he formed an advisory council, which legally in his sort of church polity he was allowed to do. And in essence, it gave a voice to the women and gave a much greater role to them in the church. And he said the church exploded. And it was just such an awesome testimony to the churches around him. He said they were kind of starting to catch on because they realized you made a little change and it's had these huge results. And so in a way, it was so cool watching him make that discovery and then implementing it, and the testimony that went out to truly the gospel work that was being carried out there. What do you desire most for men to get from any walk of life from your book?
Oh my goodness. When you tell that story, I think of in Half the Sky, the research in that book says that they would invest in women. You'll get more than 60% on your return. And so it would be better to invest in a woman, whether it's business, they won't steal your money, they'll work hard, whatever it is. So anyway, that made me think about that, because there is something about the hard work in a third world country that you see women do. It shows up. And so I guess it just makes my love for women get stronger, which is great. But I just think this, not without the men. We're not going without the men. No way. Again, that kindness of God that somehow has been bestowed on me, that I still believe God is kind to bring my body into this invitation of knowing him. I just think, like, men are so good. They just are. And even though day after day I hear of all the bad men, and I hear of all the men who've harmed, and I see men harm, I still, something in my heart is so tender of not without the men. Like, I'm indebted, and I need the good men. So again, what do I want from men to know from the book? Well, a lot of men have not been allowed to be with or be curious about a woman's body without repercussions of the woman's story, meaning like how she lashes out, or what it costs relationally, and so, or what the mother wound in men's life has looked like. And so we've driven men to, especially in sexuality, we've driven them, go figure out your sexuality on your own. You can't have sex, but just go look at pornography, and we'll excuse it because it's so common. But we've then trained at 26, we have the like leading impotence of men around, because we've handed them a broken sexuality, and we've asked them to figure it out on their own. And so part of my passion is, like, can men be curious about a woman without them having to pay for it? And can my book invite men to look at a woman's way of thinking and it not feel like it's accusing them, it not feel like it's alienating them? They're invited. And they don't, and again, I say this in a certain way, but it's not over sexualized. I talk as vulnerably as I can so that you can see my humanity and you can be with my humanity. And it's hard to objectify me in that sense. And I just think a lot of times men aren't growing up where they can just be with a woman without it being so costly that they have to turn away. So it's like, to me, I hope it's a safe place for men to be curious and get to understand a woman without having to pay for it. Whether that's, in how they're treated or sexually, or isolation. I hate isolation. I think it's death in a very muted sense, but it's just not fair for men or women to be alone. And
I think
so that's the hope.
Satan loves isolation.
Yeah.
So men and women, what is your hope for the book?
Relationship and voice. So I would say, if people can know better intimacy and people can know their voice better, men and women alike, if they can speak from a clearer place because they're in touch with their body, or they know their story. So if people can know their story more through my book, and they can understand their own voice and how they bring it, then I've won. If people can come together and have conversation about what was evoked in them or in their own stories, what they lived through, and they can share that, and there's intimacy. If husband and wife can have a healthier, more honest conversation in their sex life, or in the way they come to understanding each other's bodies, I've won. Like, that would be the answer. If people come into relationship and intimacy better, and they come into their own voices and their own story, I don't think I could ask for anything more, really.
I don't think we could ask for anything more.
No, the only thing is this: thank you from the bottom of my heart for writing this book. I feel like it was pulling the veil back on things that are kind of taboo, that maybe Christians are afraid to approach.
Yeah.
But also is this beautiful revelation of these parts of God that we don't talk about, and we haven't yet seen as the collective body of Christ. And it was awesome. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for being you, because it truly was a gift.
Thank you. Thank you both. I can't tell you enough how your endorsement, your curiosity, your care, like what it does. You have invited me so well to the table. And I'm so grateful. So grateful.
Yeah. Thank you for being at the table.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. And for everybody who joined us, thank you so much.
Yes.
Episode.